got Jeff Hanson from Babbitt, who has for some years now been developing this miraculous system that removes sulfate from mine water. And he has other irons in the fire, if you can excuse that awful pun.
Yeah, well, it's iron anyway.
Yeah. So
there's iron involved.
Yep.
I'm just going to pass this over to Jeff, but let's make it casual. Ask questions as you think about it.
Yes. Ask questions and all that. And so far, how long ago was it that I came to this group and talked about green irons?
Oh, it was the end of 22 and the beginning of 2023 when we did that.
2.5 years.
Yeah, ancient history almost, right? Well, I'd like to back up and talk about that a little bit, because that was at a time when I was beginning to get more involved in iron and steel, for a reason that you'll find out later on related to my sulfate project, because I needed a certain type of iron. So I got kind of involved in this topic and saw that we here in Minnesota are in a bit of a unique situation related to iron. I know Ely doesn't consider itself really part of the iron range any longer, but it was the old iron range. You know, we have Pioneer Pit, Miners Lake, and all this type of stuff here. And Babbitt is kind of new mining, taconite mining, right? So it's relevant. And Minnesota does supply about 85% of all the iron for primary steel making in the United States, meaning from ore, not from scrap. Okay. And everything we currently produce in Minnesota is only one place it can go: a blast furnace. For anybody who has, looked or seen one of those beasts, they're big, lots of smoke and everything coming out, particulates, and a heck of a lot of carbon dioxide. Because what they're doing is partially burning coal, make carbon monoxide, which then pulls the oxygen off of the iron to make reduced iron. And that's what a blast furnace does. And then it sends off all this carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And why it's relevant to this group is the iron and steel industry contributes about 9–10% of global greenhouse gases. It's a big number, and one of those industries that has always been considered difficult to decarbonize. But it is possible. Okay? And we here in Minnesota have never really been friends of blast furnaces, but we send our pellets to them and let them do that out east. Well, if there's another way to do iron that is not so polluting, it could be more efficient to do it by the mine, which happens to be here. And the mines are not in Pennsylvania, Pittsburgh, or Cleveland, Ohio, Gary, Indiana, etc. So that 2-3 years ago, I was talking about us saying, hey, there's an opportunity and almost an inevitable direction, I thought at the time, of Minnesota being able to contribute and participate in turning iron and steel into a less carbon intensive industry by making green iron and steel. It seemed to me that made a lot of sense for Minnesota. Well, I'd like to talk about some of the things going on that I'm not doing, but people are doing. And one of these is this Midwest Industrial Transformation Initiative, MIGHTY. Has everybody heard and studied up a lot on MIGHTY?
No, I never heard of it.
See? Both sides. That's good. Anyway, Mighty is an initiative initiated by the University of Minnesota, specifically NRI. Okay, they've got the Great Plains Institute involved. NREL was one of the people who started the thinking on it to look at Minnesota as kind of a unique place to do this. Wednesday last week, they had a 5-hour event at the Iron Trails Convention Center in Virginia to talk about this. I was there, and then afterwards took a bus tour, whatever, because it is beginning to happen in some places. We thought it was going to happen really fast here in Minnesota under some of the initiatives like the IRA and the Green Hydrogen Initiative. Okay. It slowed down somewhat, but things are still happening. And this initiative being spearheaded by NRI is something to pay attention to. Okay. Their goal is to innovate, de-risk integrated industrial innovation, global competitiveness, secure supply chain, national security, blah, 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 all this type of stuff, saying Minnesota is a special place. How can we do this to have the most cost competitive iron and steel in Minnesota while contributing to a positive environmental impact? Not a bad one, positive one. Because if we could participate in the overall decarbonization of the iron and steel industry, that's probably the biggest positive impact we here in northeastern Minnesota could do to get rid of carbon dioxide. Okay, so that's kind of what this is about. Okay, and they are, just want to switch over to this. In their technical overview of what they're doing, we've got abundant resource, natural resources, access to low cost, local energy, renewables. And they talk about this map here, which some of you may have already seen, been around a little while, about how we got the iron and the steel, we got ways to store energy, we've got ports, we got the river, we got this, that, and everything. Minnesota is kind of in a unique position in the United States to do something like this. Whether we will or not is up for debate, right? But I think we should. That's my position. And I think we've got a lot of different factors in this that help towards it. And NRI is trying to orchestrate this some. Wednesday, I call it was a big dog and pony show. A lot of hype, short on details, but kind of a good hype, saying that, hey, we can still move forward on this, okay? First and foremost, because of iron and steel, magnetic stuff, e-fuels, cement and concrete, ammonia and fertilizers. We have all those different factors here. One of the big factors related to iron and steel is the iron ore that we dig out of the ground, whether it's hematite, which came out of the pits here in Ely, or now magnetite, taconite process, we refer to taconite, which is magnetic ore, which is very low grade ore, but they can concentrate it because it's magnetic. That is iron oxide, iron bonded with oxygen. To make steel, you got to get rid of the oxygen. That's what blast furnaces do. But you can also do that with other reduction agents like methane, make syngas out of it. You can do it from coal, or you can do it from hydrogen, right? The clean way would be to do it from hydrogen, which was the plan under the IRA, okay? that product, direct reduced iron in a pellet form, is what I needed. Therefore, I got involved in when is this going to happen? When are we going to get it or whatever? Now, what I get today is not Minnesota ore, nor is it made into DRI in the United States. It comes from beyond our borders because there's not much of it done in the US yet. But that direct reduced iron, meaning iron with no more oxygen on it, 97, 98% iron, is highly reactive. And it conducts electricity, meaning it can be used in an electric arc furnace with very little to no pollution related to it. NRI is in a project. They just got another $600,000 from the legislature to develop a pilot scale DRI plant in Coleraine, Minnesota, to help de-risk this direction. Okay, so that's kind of neat and interesting or whatever, because they want to de-risk the challenges for production plant to be happening here. They are going about it. It does take a lot of energy, particularly if you're going to use electrolysis, meaning breaking apart water into hydrogen and that. It's not so expensive, still expensive, but not so expensive. If you use methane, but it's not as green. That only reduces about 60% of the carbon dioxide. But this is an initiative specifically for Minnesota that is going forward. They're looking for a lot of public support. Not many people have heard about it, and so they're trying to generate more hype, and therefore the dog and pony show, right? Well, some of us have been preaching on this topic for a number of years. Some of those folks are part of CCL, the Citizens Climate Lobby, which a small subgroup of that was formed in northeastern Minnesota, specifically to talk about what we can do about it in northeastern Minnesota to have a positive greenhouse gas reduction by helping decarbonize the iron and steel industry. And we were doing that within the structure of CCL, but it's a regional priority. The rest of the country, frankly, doesn't get us up here very much. They don't quite understand everything that's going on, nor is it really high on their priority list, particularly places like Pittsburgh, Cleveland, Gary, Indiana, who are very zealous about their steelmaking industry. Okay? Now, if you took the ore out of the mine, environmentally sound way, turn it into iron right by the mine, put that while it's still hot directly into a steel making thing, you would have some of the most cost effective iron and steel in the world. Okay? That's why it shakes the grapes of some other big steel folks, right? But it is possible. And we wanted some more attention on that. So recently, a new group was formed. It's not big, that called Northern Minnesota Nice. Isn't that nice? A little bit too cute in a way. Let's talk about Northern Minnesota. New iron and clean energy. You can't make clean iron if you don't have clean energy to go into it. And this is a recently formed nonprofit by that little nucleus group in the Citizens Climate Lobby. Our intention is to focus attention on it, be able to focus work in Minnesota on it in a kind of a lobbying capacity. Okay, we're not going to build stuff. We're going to talk to people. Mike Overend, who many of you know, is kind of leading this charge. Eric Enberg, Charlie Orzak, Russ Matson, myself. We decided to form this group, Katya Gordon from Two Harbors, etc., to bring a little more attention to it. And we support the objectives of Mighty, of NRI. They've got the money and the resources. We're just, I don't write many letters to the editor. The others in this group do. Okay. And I joined this some time ago after an ED climate group meeting in Whiteside Park on a cold day. Do you remember that, Barb?
Oh, yeah, that was the beginning of COVID.
It was beginning of COVID, and we were meeting there and shivering on the sides. Yeah. And Katya Gordon came up and talked with us. And I'm not sure who said it, it was probably Barb. Oh, you ought to talk to Jeff. He just talked about some of this. That's how I got into the group. And then they heard what I was doing on iron-related things, and they said, oh, could you join our group? They're all people, Duluth, Two Harbors, Cloquet, Iron. But there wasn't a ranger in there, okay? So I got thrown in as a token ranger, interested in iron and steel for a variety of reasons, and also talked about my sulfate project. Because if you can't get new mining, and I'm talking about iron mining, okay? Don't mix it up with the other mining. Iron mining, if you can't get it permitted, you can't do the good stuff. If you can't get a direct reduced iron facility permitted, you can't get it done. All of these processes require water. And for me, I said, oh, we got a big fight going on over sulfate in the water. Should we have the tight standards, not have the tight standards, get rid of them and streamline the permitting process, get rid of the environmental oversight? And it's created a huge divisive issue. And my position has been since the beginning, wouldn't it be better if we just solved the problem instead of fighting over it? And when this group said, hey, we'd like to promote new iron, not new iron mining, but new iron processing that would help with the decarbonization of iron and steel and cut down on those greenhouse gases, which contribute 10% of global greenhouse gases. If we can do that from this little corner up here, that should be a positive benefit. So long as we do it in an environmentally sound way and a socially just way, which for me kind of translates into solve the sulfate problem, don't get rid of the standard, agree with the tribes that their water and their wild rice is important to them, and help protect it, and find a way to do it. So that's where I've been involved. And this group, much to my pleasure and surprise, really bought into that, because they said our resistance to throwing our weight into mining is, can we do it in an environmentally sound and socially just way? If we can't, we don't want to do it. So we talked about sulfate and wild rice and indigenous rights and all this type of stuff. And they came up with this, just would like to notice some of the principles of this little small nonprofit group, which you're going to hear more about. Using Minnesota's clean energy, iron resource, and technology to manufacture climate solutions that benefit communities and the environment. It's not jobs and community against the environment. It has to be good for both of them, is the whole premise of this. So they go in and talk about that same infrastructure, like that map of Mighty, saying how Minnesota is in a bit of a unique position within the United States, and the minerals, the resources, the transportation, etc., to be able to do things so long as you can do it right. And one of the principles is focusing on clean energy opportunities to achieve economic development, not get jobs, economic development and environmental benefits. It's not an either or option. It's an and option. Addressing sulfate pollution of water in cost-effective, nature-based technology. Because if you can't get over that big fight, one side or the other is going to have to cave if we don't have a solution. And I don't like the idea of caving and not having the standards we have. The economic push for things right now, and anybody who's following the political tone right now, there's a lot of politicians out there pushing for permit reform. Make it easier to move ahead. Say, oh, we'll do our environmental review. Yeah, within 6 months and stuff like that. So I think that's risky myself. But the state is legally prohibited from demanding a standard that is not technically or economically feasible. They need a feasible solution, and I think we got it. So part of the principles of this little group includes sulfate. And lastly, working collaboratively with environmental community to develop climate and environmental solutions benefiting northern Minnesota. We all talk about we need more jobs up here, we need this, we need that, whatever. We need to diversify our economies. Well, if we were making green, non-polluting iron here, that you could then make green, non-polluting steel here, guess where the most economical place to get your steel from would be for manufacturing facilities? Right here. So it has implications and ramifications that kind of extrapolate the mine a little bit. But then what's our reality in the mining world here today? We got two major companies in mining, iron mining here today. US Steel and Cleveland Cliffs. US Steel just got bought out by Nippon Steel. Still an American company, oh yeah, but owned by a Japanese company. They're putting a lot of money in. In Japan, they're greener than US Steel is here in the United States, but they're also, the first things they're doing are actively relining blast furnaces out in Pennsylvania to add another 40 years of life to that blast furnace. And maybe someday doing a new something in Minnesota, undefined. We'll see. I have worked with US Steel on sulfate issues. I think they never believed that we could do it. When we proved we could, they stopped the work. And their latest pitch, if anyone's been watching about the variances that they want for their Keetac plant in Keewatin, where the sulfate levels are not high, but they're above the wild rice standard. So they wanted a variance. And they said categorically, if you, state of Minnesota, require us to do this, we're just going to shut down. That was a smoke screen in my book, a scare tactic. Where are they going to get their iron from? And I don't believe they'd shut down over that because they know that there are alternatives. Okay. So what's going to happen to U.S. Steel under the umbrella of Nippon Steel? We don't quite know. I don't know who's followed the newspapers the last couple of days. Cleveland Cliffs is just forming an agreement with POSCO, South Korean steel company. What the dickens they're going to do, we don't quite know. Maybe they'll do something further. But I wouldn't bet on it too much, at least not in the short term. But I would like to talk about one company that is and has been for several years preaching about doing green iron and steel in Minnesota. Nowadays, that's called Mesabi Metallics in Nashwauk, Minnesota, the far other extreme end of the Iron Range, right? Just before you fall off the edge into Grand Rapids. And as you can see under their name of Mesabi Metallics, Esser Group, Green Steel. The Esser Group is one of the largest iron and steel companies in India. They started in Minnesota some years ago under the name Esser to reestablish Butler mining in Nashwauk. They went bankrupt in India, and that had consequences here. They went bankrupt here, left the state holding $60 million. They didn't like that. Everybody got a sour taste in their mouth, and they were declared company non grata in Minnesota by the governor at one time. But they came out of their bankruptcy. They dug themselves out of a $56 billion hole by selling off their DRI facilities in India to another steel company, ArcelorMittal. And they decided to put all their bucks into this project, okay, in Nashwauk, saying, we're going to make the cheapest, the best iron and steel in the world in Nashwauk, Minnesota. They are reopening the Butler mine. They've got over 600 people operating, working daily basis out there as we speak. And they were talking about going all the way to green steel using hydrogen. They don't know when they're going to get the hydrogen in. But they're talking about still doing phase one next year, DR grade pellets, which is pellets from hematite or magnetite that are usable in a DRI process.
Would those pellets work for what you're trying to do?
No, because they're DR grade pellets, meaning they've upped the iron content by up to maybe 68% versus 65, 66. They've dropped the silica content from maybe 5% down to 2%, so that it can be used in another facility to make DRI, get that oxygen off. If you don't get the oxygen off the iron, it's not very reactive with anything because it's happy as can be bonded to that oxygen as iron oxide, okay? So they are planning on producing the end of next year, DR grade. Many articles in the newspaper and a lot of the mining industry say that's fine and dandy, keep the populace confused on it. Let people think that when you say DR grade, you're thinking about DRI. You're not. They're two different distinct stages. I need the DRI, okay? Because it's got to react with sulfide, okay? Mesabi Metallics has a plan to invest $5.7 billion in Minnesota to reopen the Butler mine. They just 2 weeks ago finished dewatering the pit to be able to do that. Producing the end of next year DR grade pellets. To then do DRI shortly after that, using methane to start with until they can get enough hydrogen. They need the hydrogen to be really green. To make hydrogen, you need green energy. Okay? They announced this publicly, the drum rolls and all, last Wednesday in Virginia. At the MITI, said there was no other mining company even mentioned there. But not one word about Cleveland-Cliffs, not one word about US Steel, who are fighting tooth and nail against doing that in Minnesota, and fighting tooth and nail to have permitting reform so it doesn't hold their feet to the fire on environmental issues. Okay? Masab Matan says, no, we're going to meet all the standards. We're going to do it.
So is this the Cleveland Cliffs and US Steel holding their feet in place due to the steel making facilities that they have?
That's my feeling. But
I mean, how much do you have to rebuild the whole structure? You mentioned the blast furnaces. What about the alternative? Are there arc furnaces that exist?
they exist in many different places, but they are many of them still being built. The electric arc furnace technology was developed to recycle steel. You take scrap steel, throw it in there, give it an electric arc, and melt it down and make new steel. That's where it started. Because of that, the US has the highest rate of steel recycling in the world. But there's not enough scrap. That's why they need DRI, has more of that. And scrap inherently has contaminants in it. That's why you can't make auto bodies out of it, okay? But at the Mighty presentation, they showed a very interesting graph. Production of steel coming from iron from blast furnaces, going down like this, down, 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 down. Every year they're retiring one or two blast furnaces. And then they show the production of taconite pellets, acid pellets going to blast furnaces. That's the supply side. An interesting fact, last year those crossed. There's now more supply of taconite pellets than there is capacity to buy taconite pellets. That's why ArcelorMittal shut down in Virginia. Too much supply and not enough demand. Why? They're closing down bad blast furnaces. But when you close down a blast furnace somewhere else, is that necessarily the best place to put a new electric arc furnace? Maybe not. Electric arc furnaces are called mini mills. They're not big, humongous. They don't cost as much, and they can be put in many different places. So you look at a map of the United States, these mini mills, electric arc furnaces, are all over creation. The closer you can recycle your scrap steel to the source, the more economical it is, right? So as you want to do new capacity, wouldn't it make sense to put it near to where the iron's coming from? Like Ashwaubenon, maybe? Okay. That's what Mesabi Metallics is convinced is the right way to do it.
That could be they're convinced that's going to be the future, that eventually those blast furnaces will be closed down, or kind of proactive in a sense.
In a sense, yes. For them, this is a new facility. So they're not tearing down a blast furnace, but they're investing in what they say is going to be the most economical and cleanest iron and steel in the United States. They gave a tour of the facility Wednesday last week. Joe Brooking, Larry Sutherland categorically stated, whether you believe it or not, it's up to you. Categorically stated, we will be producing the cleanest iron and steel in the United States and in the world. And by doing that, we will be producing the most economical iron and steel in the United States and in the world. I get a little quizzy about in the world because there's a lot happens around this world, you know.
Well, the damn Swedes are probably working it out too.
They are. The Swedes are already doing some of it. I lived for many years in Brazil. Brazil's got a heck of a lot of iron ore. They do not make DRI, but they make the iron ore that goes in my DRI, but it just happens to be made outside of Brazil and not in the US yet.
What became of
What's that?
what became of what they called steel nuggets? Is that,
You talking about Wasabi nuggets or HBI? Okay,
I don't know, there was a period when they were making 90% iron
yes, nuggets.
nuggets. And so
That was Wasabi Nugget, just off of Highway 135 at the top of the hill between Embarrass and Aurora. And it was situated on the shores of Pit 1 of the old Erie Mining Company. Okay, when we were doing our pilot testing of the sulfate reduction, we drive by it every day. Do you know why they shut down?
No.
Two basic reasons. Well, maybe three. One, they were maybe a little ahead of their time. But number two, the biggest one, I think, that plant was designed in Japan. And they did not take into account our rigorous winters. Therefore, they had conveyor belts that would transport the wet ore from one part to another. And it was a pilot plant. They were testing it. Sometimes it would break down. And those conveyor belts would stop in January and February. How do you start them back up after they're frozen solid? You look at the conveyor belts in the taconite plants here, they're all enclosed for two reasons. Keep the heat in so they don't freeze, and to cut down on the dust, right? But they built it with open conveyors, and therefore they had huge troubles on that. The second reason, which is close to my heart, is that Pit 1, Mine Pit Lake, right in front of Wasabi Nugget, has about 2,000 milligrams per liter of sulfate. That they had a variance from the EPA, not the Minnesota MPCA, but the EPA federal, to pump out 4,000 gallons a minute in the wintertime. Why in the wintertime? This wild rice doesn't grow in the wintertime. The Fond du Lac took them to court over that and won, and they lost their permit to pump the water out of that pit to get at the ore that they wanted in it. And that was the second reason that shut them down. Okay, I know that because I was talking with them. What can you do about the sulfate in the pit, right? Anyway, there has been a lot going on, and there is, and if you have not paid much attention to Wasabi Metallics, I suggest that you do. A lot of people, including our governor and lieutenant governor, had not been paying much attention to that. About a month ago, they finally went up and visited them. They are talking about environmental sustainability. They are talking about zero discharge of water. They are talking about, they want the tribes at the table.
Or what?
The tribes, Native Americans,
Yeah.
at the table talking with them. At the presentation Wednesday last week in Virginia, there was a very strong tribal participation. Every one of the panel discussions had a tribal participant. Robert Blake, Red Lake, Solar Bear, other ones from Leech Lake. And the position of Wasabi Metallics is, we want them at the table and talking with us. Okay? On air quality also, they're doing things. Anyway, they are a company that is doing things. Okay? And I think worthy of paying attention to them. I'm going to talk just a second here. Why is my share not? There we go. There we go. About my little piece of this, which is related to sulfate. Okay. Wasabi Nugget always said, we don't have a problem with sulfate because we're going to be zero discharge. Except they just finished dewatering a mine pit lake that had 5.5 billion gallons of water in it. Every gallon was over the wild rice standard, and they pumped it all out. Okay, under a previous permit or whatever. I recently had some open houses showing our technology to primarily public figures, northern Minnesota legislators, organized by some of my friends. I don't know if you guys know the Irene Hartfield or Jennifer Popala-Merhar, who's her niece between Babbitt and Embarrass, and her husband, Tom Merhar, a high school graduate in Babbitt. Die-hard Republicans. And when they said, oh, so there might be a solution to this, we'd like you to tell our right-wing politicians about it. So anyway, we did. And so this part of it, first say helping mining and jobs and the environment. I didn't say help the environment, maybe jobs, then maybe mining. No, the other way around, because to get their reference on it. It's the mine pit lake where we did our testing, and you probably all heard about how sulfate turns to hydrogen sulfide, and it's a hydrogen sulfide that damages the wild rice. There's rotten egg smell. But if there's the right amount of iron, the right kind of iron there, it'll bond with the iron and then not be as bad. So when people say it's not the sulfate that hurts wild rice, they're right. So they're right. It's not sulfate that hurts wild rice. It's the sulfide, because microbes take the sulfate, steal the oxygen from it, and make hydrogen sulfide, which is your classic rotten egg smell from that well that doesn't have adequate circulation, etc., and is also gives us our classic body odor. We did field tests with it. Just want to talk a little bit about the concept that I came up with. This is a biological process. It's a relatively slow process. Therefore, you need big volumes to grow huge communities of sulfate-reducing bacteria. So I invented a floating bioreactors. They're just floating big plastic bags of heavy-duty plastic that can float in a mine pit lake or tailings basin. In this, we fill it with fiber, plastic fiber, okay, that actually comes from recycled, certain kind of recycled carpet, that level loop that you normally put in a family room or something like that. If anybody has ever had their dog pee on the carpet, you know it grows bacteria really, really well. and has huge surface area. And we fill these big bags with that. Now, it's not moving in there. It's not abrading and rubbing against it. It's just sitting there for the microbes to attach to, so it can flow the water with the sulfate and food for the microbes past them. And then we make individual modules, we build them any size so it's scalable, and we can do full size things up. We did things because it's floating in a mine pit lake. Its reactive area is down in the water where it's not ice. So it operates as well in the winter as it does in the summer. Because you have to be able to do this year round. We started that project with NRI and proved the biology worked really good. Regularly reduced 90% of the sulfate starting at 1,100 and got it down below 3. Not just below 10, below 3. Okay. And it worked even in the wintertime. Methyl mercury production was insignificant. We know that sulfate reducing bacteria will methylate mercury if the mercury is present. But there was almost non-detect mercury. Well, there is almost non-detect mercury in most taconite mine pit lakes because nature has already precipitated it out or it's attached to the taconite. So if you do your sulfate reduction where there is little or no mercury, then you can't produce methyl mercury. I'll come back to that a little bit later, but we knew we needed a better way to deal with the hydrogen sulfide. And that's what took some long time, okay? Donor feeds, electron donor, don't need to get into that too much. But in 2022, I got a source of DRI. And say, oh, now we've got reactive iron that's electrically conductive. And so what can I do with that? I can take it, DRI pellets are electrically conductive. They're used in electric arc furnaces, over 97% iron. They have a huge surface area. They're also often called sponge iron because wherever that oxygen was that they drove out, left little voids in there. And they cost at the time about $200 a ton, maybe $300 a ton now because they are a primary feedstock for the steel industry. So they got to meet those cost objectives, okay? So what did I do? I made these, some people call them hillbilly electrodes. I said, no, they're not hillbilly, they're Northwoods. And we made electrodes out of them.
Handcrafted.
Handcrafted. If you watch this video here, you can see up in the top corner the black being formed. You can see down here that it's cascading down. What's happening? We have hydrogen sulfide in the form of HS minus sign on it from the sulfate, the stinky stuff you don't want. And then we mobilize the iron to go from one electrode to the other. So we have a sacrificial anode giving off iron in the form of Fe2+. And as soon as that plus iron sees that minus hydrogen sulfide, it goes and it bonds and makes that black stuff that falls down, which means we can collect it and remove it from the system, therefore removing the sulfur from the system. If you leave the sulfur in, it will recreate the sulfate when it can get oxygen, okay? You don't want to oxidize back to sulfate because then you've got nowhere, right? So with these electrodes, we were able to do it in the bioreactor columns. We've consistently reduced, high levels of sulfate down to less than 3. Then using iron, we remove the sulfide, okay? And so this is just a simple graph where we take sulfate reducing bacteria, which are all around us. We give them food. They convert it to hydrogen sulfide. We give it iron, and it makes iron sulfide.
What's the food?
the food is what we use. It can be, and we call it an electron donor because it's really giving the energy. That's what food does. It gives you energy, right? What we use is a blend of ethanol with glycerol, two forms of an alcohol that are totally biodegradable. And in high concentrations, they're preservative. But when you feed just a little bit, it's really great food. You get bugs on booze. They love it. Okay. And by controlling that very carefully, we feed with an IV drip. Okay. You know, like 4 milliliters an hour type of thing. Because then you can control what the microbes do with that. So that food is totally biodegradable. And we want to give it just enough so the microbes do what they want to do. We don't want excess going downstream. Okay. And as you can see, there is a byproduct that we don't talk about, but when you take the sulfur away from the hydrogen sulfide, what's left over? Hydrogen. So hydrogen bubbles off. And that's how we fill the balloons with hydrogen. Yes, they do burn, but they don't explode. You can light them on fire because they're hydrogen. They're not helium. Helium is out on the Dunker River Road. It's hydrogen. So that's just an interesting side thing. So anyway, all this stuff, I'm not going to go and belabor all these things, but want to have you have one number in mind. To remove 1 metric ton of sulfate, which is quite a bit of sulfate, the number one cost is the amount of food we have to give the microbes to do that. And that cost currently is $1,098. It is our biggest individual cost. If you take all the costs involved, labor, capital investment, etc., and profit, the cost to remove a ton of sulfate, all in, is less than $2,000. And the capital investment is low. And that's why I say, and other people have been agreeing with me, that it is feasible, and there is no reason why U.S. Steel should shut down a mine over this topic. Nor is there a good reason to say, oh, we can't do it, therefore forget the wild race sulfate standard. Forget the tribal rights in our agreements with them. Can't do it. Yes, it can be done, and it can be done economically. And these are the numbers that have been shared with the state of Minnesota, the MPCA, and different mining companies. And they're good numbers. Not to be pontificating about it. And so if we go through all the calculations and everything, which we have done with others, I'm not going to bore you guys with that. But it is feasible, and it can be done. And I'd like to go back and make a closing comment about Mesabi Metallics. Their position on sulfate is they don't have a problem because they're going to be zero discharge. Last week, they submitted to the state of Minnesota their mining plan. And the state of Minnesota had said, hey, you guys went bankrupt one time already. We're sick and tired of mining companies doing stuff and creating damages and then disappearing and walking away. That has been standard operating procedure in past years. State of Minnesota said, no, you have to put the money up for escrow for full closure of your mine. If it lasts for 40 years or it lasts for 1 year. And that's enough money to tear down all the buildings, get rid of all the pipelines, all the high line ponds, and to drain the tailings basin. But you can't drain the tailings basin if it doesn't meet the wild rice sulfate standard. They have been required, put in escrow in the plan, enough money to solve the sulfate issue in their tailings basin, which they were projecting would go up and up and up over the years, right? In a place where we don't have a problem until it comes to closure. If you know where Keewatin is, the next town on the Iron Range is Nashwauk. Keewatin is where Keetac of US Steel is. Nashwauk is where Mesabi Metallics are. They both have tailings basins. And they both drain into O'Brien Lake and O'Brien Creek. They are fixed at the hip together. If US Steel wanted to shut down, would the state of Minnesota make the same requirement for them? No. I don't know, but it's a valid question. They are requiring it of the new mining company. And the new mining company is saying, okay, we will do that. Which is a little different music than what we normally hear. Now, are they really going to do it? Well, time will tell or whatever. I'm not going to put my hand in the fire for it. But they're telling the right game. To do new iron ore mining. Well, it's a mine that went bust in the past years. Really good ore. Make DR grade pellets. Make DRI. Put an electric arc furnace. Make green steel. And eventually shut down in an environmentally sound way, meeting all the requirements. And they took the position last week, Wednesday, with the tribal people there. We will meet all the standards, including the tribal standards. I think that's a positive stand. I hope to hell they do it. But in my book, that operation in Nashwauk is one of the most economically and environmentally relevant projects in the state of Minnesota. And would have huge ramifications for northeastern Minnesota. And I hope more people begin to see that.
What are they making? DR pellets?
They are going to be making, they say by the end of next year, DR graded pellets, which means the pellets that are slightly better than taconite pellets that can go to another facility to make DRI. Because the DRI plant itself is about $1.5 billion. They say they're going to do it, but it's going to take them another year or two after that before they can do it. So they will be selling to the other markets who have electric arc furnaces already, but can't get enough raw material. They cannot count on selling to Cleveland Cliffs or US Steel. Those two companies don't like a competitor next door. And they've been fighting hand and fist to avoid it. So anyway, that's my preaching.
Thank you very much.
Are you getting good funding to develop this to the next stage? Are you now, your interest in getting the science and the is done and you pass it on to the next group?
Well, we're not exactly passing it on yet, but we do have two things related to the funding that are really quite significant. One, we have been approved for an LCCMR grant related to the Dunker River and Birch Lake. The Dunker River and Bob Bay to some degree, but mostly the Dunker River is the mining impacting Birch Lake and the White Iron Chain of Lakes, and consequently the boundary waters. By Minnesota Power, who runs the dam, and the MPCA, who measures the sulfate, there's an average of 3,039 metric tons of sulfate going over the Birch Lake Dam annually. Most of that comes from the Dunker River. Our LCSMR grant is to put a mobile unit out there, not to treat the whole Dunker River, but to show what can be done on reducing sulfate and also capturing the mercury. And we got a grant for $758,000 to do that starting July next year for a 1-year period.
Wow.
Together with Wycola is leading it. Dave Holt, president of Wycola, is the project manager. Clearwater Biologic is supporting it, as well as Bay West Environmental. That is significant starting July next year. Another mining company that's not US Steel or Cleveland Cliffs is supporting us right now with ongoing testing to show to the MPCA and DNR how they could deal with sulfate at closure. So you can kind of understand who that is, right? And the interesting thing is, they have taken the position that if you wait for closure, then the sulfate levels are going to be high. And it's going to cost a lot more money. That means we have to put a lot more money in escrow for it. What about if we just keep the sulfate levels low from day one? Just keep taking it out. Get rid of it. Don't let it get up to 1,000, which is the right way to deal with it. And we're working with them on that, and they are supporting us in doing that. So I think there are positive things happening. And I hope we as a state of Minnesota promote good, economically sound things that are totally sound environmentally. And if in that process can help decarbonize the iron and steel industry, which is some of the most polluting industry in the world, that would be a positive step. Today, China is working in that direction much faster than we are. Of course, they were worse than we were a little while ago also, but they're working big time to do this, as well as some other countries. Sweden has taken, some other ones. I hope that we can move on. And Minnesota is the state best strategically positioned to participate in that.
Wow, that's wonderful.
So,
Great.
When did they submit that mine plan? That was last week?
last week,
Okay.
Wednesday,
Oh, on the same day, okay.
not at the
Yeah, yeah,
mining.
no, yeah, okay.
I guess I'm also a little curious, yeah, just like my brain did immediately go to just scheming a timeline where then if this technology is, like seems promising or is advancing, that twin metals is then taking that to like become all the more amped up to justify the implementation of a mine there. And I'm wondering, like what the fallout would still be of, the location of that next to the camps that are there and the trees that are removed and, that's still like, is that something that you're, considering and like concerned about? Like, heaven forbid that suddenly the budget behind all this technology goes out, if they've got their, mine running and just don't want to stop because they got it approved and it's easy to do that under the craziness, or is it a win because the craziness might be pushing that no matter what. So if we have a way to deal with those impacts, we feel good about it. Like, yeah, what are your thoughts around all of that?
I think we need another 2 hours, shouldn't we?
Well, but the short answer,
It's like the elephant in the room that,
Yeah.
like, all this is incredible.
it is, and I think, first off, it's a great question because it is the question bouncing around a lot. And I make a definite point of saying, I don't have the answer to that question. I do have thoughts about it. One of my thoughts about it is, if we don't demand that the iron and steel industry meet stringent environmental standards, how the hell are we gonna get Twin Metals to do it?
Is it fundamentally more sulfide in the Twin Metals project?
Well, yeah, it is sulfide ore because things like copper, nickel, and all these, they bond with sulfur. So what they're mining is metal sulfides,
Right.
okay?
Is your technology?
Applicable for that?
Yeah, exactly.
No, it's not exact. Their type of thing does traditionally make acid mine drainage, where you make sulfuric acid and it goes very acidic and it dissolves more metals in it, and it's really bad. Our technology came from the technology to remediate those things, because they use sulfate reducing bioreactors to convert the sulfate to hydrogen sulfide, which then bonds again with the metals because it also raises the pH and precipitates out the metal. So it raises the pH, so it's not as acidic, and it gets the metals out. That's what is traditionally done at old mine sites, Superfund sites, et cetera, et cetera. And it's those people who are doing that that said, hey, Jeff, you better look in your own front yard. You got a sulfate issue. What we didn't realize at the beginning is, but we don't have the dissolved metals to get rid of the hydrogen sulfide then, like you do in these other applications. That's why we had to add iron. Okay, because we didn't have dissolved metals. So our system is not applicable there. Some of the fundamental basics of it could be, because that is what is done for remediation of those types of mining. But I think there's a lot of proof that needs to be done before we do something on the shores of my lake. I live on the shores of Birch Lake, and I care about it. My position is, this is very personal, we need to be moving forward with New Range. It's not in the Boundary Waters watershed. It's on a moonscape of a landscape because it was the old Erie Mining Company. I've been out there, I've worked with them. And that is the place we could learn and prove how it can be done. My technology is not applicable to the copper nickel process itself. That's just too much sulfur. But New Range has taken the commitment that they would address the legacy issues left over from Erie mining of those 15 mine pit lakes, that every one of them is way over 1,000 milligrams per liter, and that is the #1 contributor of sulfate to the St. Louis River and what's going into Lake Superior. And they, on their website, say not only will they not add to sulfate, because they're going to use reverse osmosis for their process, but they will reduce it to the tune of 5,000 metric tons annually. How are they going to do that? By treating the water that's coming out of the legacy taconite mine pit lakes, which is going downstream. Every second we're sitting here. And that is the biggest sulfate impact for the whole St. Louis River system going down to that. That happens because when you stop mining and the mine pits fill with water, that's when you create a lot of sulfate. Not when they're operating, when you're done. When they're operating in their tailings basin, yes.
I had a technical question, which I may or may not understand the answer to, but you were talking about the mercury.
Right.
Like tailings basins don't have a lot of mercury in them, which, yeah, I did not know. But we have obviously issues with mercury across across the state, but in northern Minnesota, in all other sorts of
Yes.
water bodies. So,
Airborne mercury.
but
Well,
that-
that's where it
that-
comes from, most of
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
falls
we
in
do
water.
create a good deal of that airborne mercury in Minnesota also
Yeah, including
from the taconite plants.
taconite mines, yeah, and
The
coal
plants,
mines, but
yeah,
yeah.
coal fired.
But so your technology doesn't work when the water body is mercury impaired? Is that, did I understand that
No.
correctly? Oh, okay. You didn't say that. Okay.
It's very different, but it does relate to mercury, okay? I gotta back up a little. What is the most prevalent form of mercury on Earth? You might not know that, so I'll tell you. It's called cinnabar.
Oh, yeah.
Okay? It is the color vermilion. It's what you put in paint to make red barns red. It's what you put in rouge to make the cheeks red. It is mercury bonded with sulfur. It is mercury sulfide. It is the most stable form of mercury out there. That's why you can add it to paint. So in our system, we are taking out the sulfur with the iron. The iron and the sulfur have a variety of very good environmental remediation uses. One of those big ones is sequestering and taking out mercury. There's a company right now that sells iron sulfide, just like what we're going to be producing, we are producing now, as a product to scrub mercury out of flue gas for coal-fired power plants.
And that has some value then.
It does have value. If we could sell our iron sulfide from our project for 10% of what the market is paying for it today, we'll pay for the whole darn system in double. One of our interests are the byproducts that we're producing, because they're good for chlorinated solvents, they're good for mercury, they're good for chrome-6, they're good for a whole bailiwick of remediation applications. And because that is the result of our system, no mercury would get through our system. It would be captured and retained in that iron sulfide.
I think we should wind
Yeah,
it
wrap
up.
it up.
We're past
Thank
the
you for
hour.
your patience. I
Yeah.
told you it needed.
Thank you.
Okay.